Why did no one move? Why did 200 trained soldiers, men and women who had seen war, freeze when a decorated colonel raised his hand to strike a woman half his size? Maybe because deep down they all knew what that hand represented: power unchecked, authority unchallenged, the old rules of silence. But the story didn't begin there, with a crack of bone and a gasp of disbelief. It began in shadows, quiet choices made long before this parade ground moment. Fort Bragg stretched across North Carolina like its own city, a sprawl of concrete, barbed wire, and relentless order. American flags snapped in the humid morning air, their shadows cutting across blacktop where generations of boots had worn the grooves of repetition. Commands echoed from drill fields. Engines growled from convoys heading out for training runs. Every sound reinforced one truth: this place existed to forge warriors, and warriors were expected to know their place. Captain Elena Harper moved through this world as if she belonged nowhere and everywhere all at once. She wasn't flashy, didn't bark orders louder than the men, didn't strut. She moved like smoke. Blonde hair pulled back tight, a uniform that hung loose enough to make her forgettable. Most assumed she was another logistics officer, stuck with paperwork and training rosters after too many tours had burned her out. That assumption kept her safe, safe but invisible. And invisibility had a cost. During morning formations, her eyes sometimes drifted, not over the rows of soldiers around her but far away, to sand dunes shimmering in the heat, to the metallic taste of dust carried on helicopter rotors, to the smell of cordite after a firefight she had survived, though others hadn't. Her body stood on American soil. Her mind lived elsewhere. She bent down quietly to help a young cadet, maybe 18, whose straps had tangled on his gear after the obstacle course. "Steady pressure, not force," she whispered, fingers moving with efficient grace. "Force creates resistance. Let it adjust itself." The boy nodded, grateful, embarrassed, but relieved. That was Elena, always teaching without drawing attention, always lifting quietly instead of scolding. But not everyone saw kindness as strength. "Bleeding heart," muttered a sergeant nearby, smirking to his companion. "Couldn't hack it in the field. Desk jockey with opinions." They didn't bother to lower their voices. They wanted her to hear. She did, and she said nothing. How many times had she bitten her tongue to keep the peace, to survive the system without drawing fire? Silence sometimes required more strength than speaking, but silence also ate at you, little by little, until you wondered if you'd mistaken patience for complicity. That morning, silence was tested. Colonel Marcus Vance arrived. At 53, he carried himself like a relic of the old guard. His uniform strained across a body gone soft, but arrogance filled the gaps. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never faced true consequences. His steel-gray eyes swept across the assembled soldiers with practiced disdain, sorting them into categories: threats, tools, or irrelevancies. He was a man insulated by the system he embodied. Complaints against him had vanished into black files. Careers of female officers had crumbled after personality conflicts with him. A trail of whispers followed his path, but never justice. And this morning, fate had placed him in Elena's path. The collision was nothing, her shoulder brushing his as she returned equipment to storage. A simple accident, but to Vance, no contact was innocent. A subordinate touching him was an affront. His eyes darkened like a storm cloud over prairie. "Watch where you're going, Captain," he growled. Her rank spat like an insult. "My apologies, sir," Elena replied evenly. No defiance, no challenge. She stepped back, shrinking on the surface, but something in her stillness, something in her silence, made the air hum with static, like the moment before lightning finds the earth. The stage was set. 200 personnel gathered in the training hall for the morning's demonstration. Light filtered through tall windows, painting long shadows across mats worn by endless sparring drills. Vance strutted to the center, his voice booming, his sermon already familiar. He spoke of discipline, of toughness, of how the military had grown weak with soft values and women in combat roles. Real warriors, he said, understood hierarchy. Real warriors knew their place. And then his eyes found her. Captain Harper, front and center. Elena stepped forward, her face neutral, her mind flickering elsewhere. Fallujah, 2004. Mosul, 2017. Memories pressed against her ribs, but her steps never faltered. She played these games before, where the stakes weren't bruised pride but bullets in the dark. She stood before him at attention. Vance circled her like a predator enjoying the performance. Captain Harper represents our support personnel, administrators, paper pushers, desk jockeys. Some believe everyone deserves combat training. He paused, letting the laughter ripple. I believe in staying in your lane. Women like Harper belong behind desks, not in command. Uneasy silence spread across the crowd. A female lieutenant clenched her jaw at the back but said nothing. Everyone knew speaking against Vance was career suicide. Basic stance, Captain, Vance commanded, his voice dripping with mockery. Show us what they taught you in, where was it? Supply Corps. He knew her file, he knew she'd served more than supply. But the lie suited his theater. Elena complied. Her stance was textbook, rigid, perfect in form but stripped of life, a performance within a performance. She let him see what he wanted to see. Pathetic, he sneered, shoving her shoulder. This is why women shouldn't pretend to be warriors. You lack instinct, aggression, natural ability. In real combat, hesitation kills, weakness kills, and this, he gestured dismissively, is weakness personified. From the crowd, Master Sergeant Rodriguez caught her eye. He'd seen her before, years back in another desert, though he didn't yet realize it. His subtle headshake pleaded, "Don't engage, don't take the bait." But Vance pressed closer, his hand twitching with a hunger for violence. "You think your little ribbons mean anything," he spat, voice rising. "I've seen your type, hiding behind regulations, filing reports while real soldiers do the fighting. You're everything wrong with the modern military." Her breath stayed steady, but her weight shifted, her hand softened. A bowstring drawn. Centuries of instinct whispered beneath her skin, threatening to surface. And yet she waited. His entourage smirked from the sidelines. One lifted a phone, ready to record her humiliation. They had traded moments like currency before, favor for silence, silence for protection. They expected another trophy for their collection. But what came next would change everything. Vance raised his hand. 200 soldiers held their breath, every pair of eyes fixed on the descending palm. It wasn't a training gesture. It wasn't instruction. It was punishment, a message. Her eyes tracked the arc, distance, force, angle. She didn't just see his hand. She saw every man who had ever mistaken fear for respect, every bully who confused cruelty with strength. And in that suspended heartbeat, something shifted. Her body moved. Faster than most could register, her left hand intercepted his wrist, her right twisting into a perfect joint lock. Precision born not of training halls but of alleyways, rooftops, fire-lit nights where hesitation meant death. The sound came sharp, a crack like winter wood snapping under boot. The colonel screamed. His arm buckled, broken before it reached her face. He crumpled to his knees, disbelief painted across him. Elena released him immediately, stepping back, breathing steady. Her calm was more dangerous than rage. And then she spoke. "Enough." One word, not shouted, not aggressive, absolute. The word rippled through the crowd, rewriting their understanding of the woman before them. This was no desk officer, no supply clerk. This was someone else entirely. Dust caught in the sunbeams, swirling around her like a halo. She stood in silence, her chest rising slowly. Inside her mind, a memory stirred. Not Iraq, not Afghanistan, but Ohio. A little girl standing against playground bullies. Her grandmother's voice in her ear, true strength whispers, "Child, it never needs to shout." That whisper lived in her now. 200 soldiers breathed as one, held captive in revelation. And the moment stretched on, heavy, alive with questions. Who was she really? How had she moved like that? What else was she hiding? The answers would not come today, not all of them. But one truth had broken free. Dignity doesn't always bend. Sometimes it snaps bone before it ever bows. And for the first time in years, Elena Harper felt something she had buried deep. A dangerous thing, a liberating thing. Freedom. What happens after silence breaks? After years of swallowing words, biting your tongue, playing small, what happens the moment the dam finally shatters? The gymnasium didn't know, not yet. 200 soldiers stood frozen, some with mouths open, some with phones raised against regulation, some with expressions shifting between shock and awe. The colonel, Marcus Vance, knelt on the mat clutching his ruined arm, his scream still echoing against mirrored walls. The sound had already traveled farther than any of them realized. Elena Harper stood alone in the eye of it all, calm, breathing steady. But inside, the war began. Because she had just crossed the line she'd sworn never to cross, she had revealed herself. And the whispers began. They said she was logistics. No, did you see that? No logistics officer moves like that. She didn't even hesitate. She broke him like she'd done it 1,000 times. The voices circled her, wrapping around the silence she carried in her chest. Vance's entourage moved, but not toward him. They moved toward her. 3 of his loyal officers, men who had built their careers off his shadow, off the old system's protection, stepped forward. They weren't carrying weapons, but their posture screamed confrontation. Then it happened. Elena's eyes, just her eyes, met theirs. And they stopped. No movement, no words spoken, just hesitation. Because something in her gaze wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was memory. A memory of deserts, of ambushes, of choices between survival and death. Her eyes said one thing: I've been here before, don't test me. And for the first time, soldiers who had mocked her hesitated. Vance groaned, dragging air through clenched teeth. His voice cracked between pain and disbelief. You're nobody, a paper pusher. I've seen your file. Elena's head tilted. Her voice came soft but carried to every corner of the hall. You've seen what I allowed you to see. The air shifted. Conversations halted. Even the sound of boots scuffing against concrete went still. She reached into her pocket. For years, that pocket had held the symbols of a past erased. Now, one by one, they surfaced. A silver star. A bronze star with valor. 2 purple hearts. Each metal caught the sun streaming from the high windows, a glint that stabbed the room like revelation. Soldiers inhaled sharply. Then finally a coin, black, simple, heavy with meaning that few in that room truly understood. We don't exist, she said, lifting it high, until we choose to. Silence thickened. For a moment, the air itself seemed to resist sound. Because everyone had heard the stories. Stories whispered at bases across the world. About a unit that wasn't supposed to exist. About missions carried out in countries never acknowledged. About warriors who operated so far in the shadows that even their names were ghosts. And Elena Harper had just told them she had been one of those ghosts. Her hand trembled slightly as she returned the coin to her pocket. A small crack in her armor, invisible to most. But inside, the weight hit her like a wave. Years of carefully maintained invisibility, undone in a single breath. She had lived a decade in shadow, serving under another name, teaching instead of leading, watching instead of striking. She had chosen silence, chosen patience, because she knew the system she fought wasn't an enemy you could shoot. It was one you had to expose. And now she had exposed herself instead. Impossible, Vance gasped, his voice fatting, sweat dripping down his temple, his face twisted between arrogance and terror. Command would have told me. I'd have clearance. Your clearance, Elena replied, means nothing to people who don't exist. Every syllable landed like a hammer. And the crowd shifted. The ground itself seemed to tilt. Because in that moment, soldiers who had whispered against her, mocked her, dismissed her, now saw a different truth. A truth that made them question every assumption they had swallowed whole. But the revelation didn't end there. Her eyes swept across the crowd until they landed on Master Sergeant Rodriguez. "You were there," she said. The man stiffened, confused, until memory slammed into him like shrapnel. Mosul 2017, a collapsed building, fire from 3 directions. He remembered the dust choking his lungs, the burning in his chest as a sucking wound stole his breath. And a figure, a shadow pulling him through rubble, barking orders, directing fire, saving lives. 17 men trapped, 15 saved, 2 lost. He had lived because of her. "You carried me out," Rodriguez whispered, his voice cracking. Tears, real, raw, uncontainable, streamed down his face. The room held its breath as the seasoned veteran broke. 20 years of hardened discipline fell away, leaving only gratitude and shame. "You saved us, and I stood here and watched him humiliate you." His voice shook, rising with guilt and revelation. We all let him because we were too blind, too cowardly." His sobs were not quiet. They rang through the gym like confession. And the others felt it. Because everyone in that room had seen moments when something was wrong, when someone was wrong, and chosen silence. Some out of fear, some out of self-preservation, some out of habit. And here stood Elena Harper, proof that silence always has a cost. "Have you ever discovered that someone you overlooked was extraordinary?" Her voice echoed, not as a boast but as a question that dug into every chest. "Have you ever realized too late what you should have seen all along?" Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to questions. "Why hide?" a young lieutenant finally called, trembling but brave. "Why let them treat you like nothing?" Elena's face softened just slightly. The warrior's mask pulled back and the teacher's voice returned. "Because strength doesn't need display. Because change requires patience, not just force. And sometimes," her gaze swept the room, "people need to see even heroes pushed down. The question is, do we stay down?" Her words landed heavier than metals. Vance collapsed fully, medics rushing at last to his side. His supporters stumbled, their certainty cracking like glass. Cameras stayed lifted, phones capturing history despite regulations. The gymnasium wasn't just a training hall anymore. It was a courtroom, a battlefield, a confessional. And in the center of it all, Elena Harper stood revealed. No longer the invisible officer hiding in paperwork, no longer the shadow. But with freedom came danger. Because now she was seen. And there were people, high above even Vance, who had no interest in her being seen. As chaos erupted, as shouts tangled with the wail of sirens pulling up outside, as soldiers surged with questions and fears, Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her choice. Her mission had never been about one man. It was about a system that protected him, a system that had grown comfortable with its rot. And she had just declared war on it. Not with weapons, but with truth. What would you sacrifice to expose the truth? The answer was no longer hypothetical. For Elena, it had begun. What happens when truth refuses to stay buried? The gymnasium still hummed with aftershocks. 200 soldiers carried the same memory now, a colonel broken, a woman revealed, silence shattered. It spread like fire across the base before the medics even carried Vance out on a stretcher. Phones buzzed. Files circulated. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. By nightfall, Fort Bragg was no longer a fortress of order. It was a whispering hive. Some whispered her name with awe. Others spat it like a curse. But no one ignored it. Elena Harper, the woman they had dismissed as a paper pusher, the woman who had carried ghosts in silence, the woman who broke the colonel's arm without hesitation. She walked back to her quarters in the fading light, her body calm but her thoughts unraveling. Every step she took felt like walking into crosshairs. Because she knew the system wasn't going to let this moment pass, not quietly, not cleanly. Her quarters were sparse, almost monastic. A single bed, a desk with reports stacked neatly, a duffel bag packed but never unpacked. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed her boots slowly, methodically. That was how she calmed herself, order against the chaos, ritual against the storm. She set her dog tags on the desk, staring at them in the dim glow. They didn't carry her real name, not anymore. The weight of her choice pressed on her chest. She had spent years disappearing, fading into the background, letting people underestimate her. She had become a ghost because ghosts could move freely, unseen, unchallenged. That cover was gone now. And the institution she'd spent years trying to infiltrate would soon turn its eyes fully on her. There was a knock at her door. Sharp, authoritative. She opened it to find two men in black suits, badges half hidden but unmistakable. Military intelligence. "Captain Harper," one said, his voice clipped. "Command requests your presence, immediately." Requests, that word again. It meant ordered. She followed them into the night where the humid air clung like a second skin. The drive across base was silent, only the engine's growl filling the void. Soldiers they passed stopped mid-step, eyes lingering on the vehicle. Some saluted instinctively. Others looked away. When the car stopped, she wasn't surprised to see where they had brought her. The Command Operations Center. Inside, the room pulsed with screens and maps, glowing blue and red in the dimness. High-ranking officers lined the table, their faces carved from suspicion and fatigue. Generals, colonels, advisors, all staring at her like a problem they hadn't solved yet. At the head of the table sat Major General Wilkes. His presence was different from Vance's. He didn't strut. He didn't sneer. He weighed every second, every silence. "Captain Harper," Wilkes began, his voice steady but sharp as a scalpel, "do you know why you're here?" She held his gaze. "Because I broke Colonel Vance's arm." A ripple passed across the table. Not amusement, not approval, just tension. Wilkes leaned forward. "Because you exposed yourself." The words landed heavier than accusation. They landed like truth. Her silence stretched. She would not explain, not here. Wilkes' eyes narrowed. "Task Force 7, that coin, those medals, we buried those files, we buried you. So tell me why surface now, why here?" Elena's jaw tightened. She thought of Fallujah, of Mosul, of bodies carried, medals pinned, truths buried. She thought of her grandmother's words, true strength whispers. Finally she spoke, "Because he crossed a line." Wilkes exhaled slowly, fingers steepled. "And how many lines did you cross today?" The room shifted. Officers exchanged glances, some cold, some calculating. One colonel leaned forward, venom in his tone. "You humiliated a senior officer in front of 200 witnesses. Do you realize the damage you've done to morale, to discipline?" Elena's eyes flicked to him. Calm, controlled. Morale, discipline. He tried to strike a subordinate in front of 200 witnesses. What damage did that do? The colonel bristled, but Wilkes lifted a hand to silence him. He studied her for a long moment. "Do you understand the position you've put us in?" Elena didn't flinch. "Do you understand the position you've allowed him to put us in?" The silence that followed was a battlefield of its own. Wilkes finally leaned back, expression unreadable, dismissed. It wasn't permission, it was warning. As she left the room, their whispers followed her like shadows. Words about containment, about damage control, about how to handle the story before it spread beyond Fort Bragg. But it was already too late. By morning, the video was everywhere. A colonel raising his hand. A woman snapping his arm. A voice saying, "Enough." The internet didn't care about military secrecy. It didn't wait for official statements. It saw truth and carried it farther than any report could reach. And the world began to ask questions. Who was she? Why did no one stop him? How long had this been happening? Inside the base, tension coiled tighter. Female officers stood taller, a new fire in their eyes. Male soldiers whispered uneasily, some defending her, some condemning. Lines were being drawn in silence. And Elena knew what was coming. Because institutions don't crumble quietly, they fight back. That night, she sat alone at her desk, staring at the medals she had once refused. The coin that symbolized a life she had buried. Her hand trembled as she turned it over, feeling the weight of memory pressing into her palm. She remembered the day she asked to disappear, standing in a Pentagon office, telling a bewildered general she could do more good as nobody than as somebody. She remembered the look in his eyes, half disbelief, half relief. He had let her vanish because it was easier than facing what she wanted to expose. And now, after years of silence, her face was everywhere. Her phone buzzed, a message unmarked, untraceable. They know you're not safe. No sender, no signature, but she recognized the code. It was from one of her own, a ghost who still moved in the shadows. The war had already begun. She leaned back, closing her eyes. For years she had lived as Harper, the invisible officer. Now she would have to decide if she was ready to be Thorne again. Commander Elena Thorne, the name the shadows remembered. The name the system feared. The night pressed close, thick with silence, but her grandmother's voice echoed in her chest again. Sometimes strength whispers, but sometimes it answers. And Elena knew tomorrow would demand an answer. What does an institution do when its secrets slip free? It doesn't apologize. It doesn't reform overnight. It survives, by any means necessary. Fort Bragg woke restless. Soldiers marched, drills continued, rifles cracked in distant ranges, but the rhythm was off. Commands rang louder, sharper, as if to drown out the whispers spreading like wildfire. Everyone had seen the video. Not all admitted it, but the image was burned into their minds, the colonel collapsing, the woman standing unshaken. And beneath the surface, loyalties shifted. Some whispered admiration. Others whispered betrayal. But no one could return to the silence that had existed before. Elena Harper walked among them with measured calm, her uniform plain, her stride steady. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but she felt the air watching her, heavy with new weight. Every salute carried hesitation. Every glance carried questions. She could feel it in the silence at the Chow Hall, where conversations faltered the moment she entered. In the barracks, where laughter dimmed as her footsteps passed. In the offices, where reports were filed with unusual precision, as though paper could shield anyone from what was coming. She didn't need intel reports to know what would happen next. The system would push back. The first push came quietly. A summons to medical review. Routine evaluation, they told her. Protocol after a physical altercation. She sat under fluorescent lights while a major in a white coat asked questions not about her health, but about her mind. Have you been feeling stressed lately, Captain? Any trouble distinguishing past events from present? Nightmares, flashbacks. His pen scratched, already writing her story before she spoke. She knew the tactic well. Question the soldier's stability, not the system's abuse. Paint her as unstable, dangerous to herself or others. Shift the focus. Protect the rank, not the truth. Her answers came calm, deliberate. No cracks, no fuel for their fire. The major frowned when the session ended. He hadn't gotten what he came for. The second push came harder. A formal reprimand, filed under conduct unbecoming of an officer. It used words like insubordination and excessive force. The document landed on her desk with the weight of inevitability. She read it slowly, carefully, Her pulse stayed steady, but inside heat flared. Because the truth of that paper wasn't about her. It was about everyone watching, about sending a message, step out of line and this is your reward. But she refused to sign. Instead, she left the reprimand untouched and walked out into the evening air, where the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the base. That was when she noticed the car. Black, windows tinted, parked across from her quarters. It hadn't been there before. It didn't leave that night. The third push was more personal. An email, untraceable sender, attached photographs. Her leaving her quarters, walking across base, sitting alone in the mess hall, every movement tracked, documented. And one more photo. Her grandmother's house in Ohio. The front porch. The swing where Elena once sat as a girl, listening to the woman's voice whisper strength into her bones. Her chest tightened as she stared at the image. It wasn't a threat spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. They were reminding her, ghosts don't get families, ghosts don't get ties, ghosts only get shadows. For the first time in years, her hand shook as she closed the laptop. She sat in the dark, breathing steady, willing herself to stillness. Because fear was what they wanted, doubt was what they fed on. But she couldn't deny the storm inside. She thought of Rodriguez, his tears in the gymnasium, his voice breaking with gratitude and shame. She thought of the young lieutenant who had dared to ask why she stayed silent. She thought of the cadet fumbling with straps, the boy who needed guidance more than discipline. This was why she had chosen invisibility, to move among them, to plant seeds where they could grow, to fight not with glory but with patience. And yet now she wondered, had patience only allowed rot to deepen? The next day, she was ordered to a closed hearing. No audience, no cameras, just 4 senior officers and a recorder on the table. The questions came sharp, calculated. Did you provoke Colonel Vance? Did you intend to injure him? Were you aware this incident would undermine morale across the base? Each question twisted truth into accusation. Elena answered evenly, refusing to rise to the trap. I defended myself. I restrained him with minimum force necessary. His injury resulted from his aggression, not mine. The officers exchanged glances. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for justification to bury her. At the end, one leaned forward, his voice low but heavy with threat. You have 2 choices, Captain. Sign a statement admitting misconduct, accept reassignment, quietly, or face charges that will end your career. Her silence stretched. The clock on the wall ticked like a drumbeat. Finally, she spoke. You're asking me to choose between dignity and survival. The officer smirked faintly. Most choose survival. Her eyes held his, calm, steady, unblinking. Not all. The hearing ended. No decision, just tension thick enough to choke on. When she stepped outside, rain had begun to fall. Heavy, cleansing, merciless. She stood in it for a moment, letting the water soak her uniform, her hair, her skin. And in the rain, memories returned. Fallujah, 2007. Smoke rising over shattered streets. She remembered the moment she had stood over the graves of men she had led, medals heavy in her hand, and whispered to the desert, "These mean nothing if the system protects predators." That was the day Commander Elena Thorne had disappeared into classified files. The day Captain Elena Harper had been born. And now, standing in the rain, she realized something. The system was no different now. It hadn't learned. It hadn't changed. It still protected its own. The difference was her. She wasn't invisible anymore. And that meant the real fight was only beginning. That night her phone buzzed again, another untraceable message. This time only 3 words. They're coming tomorrow. She didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, medals laid out before her like memories carved in metal. She studied them in silence, each one a story, each one a scar. Her grandmother's voice whispered again, faint but unyielding. Sometimes strength whispers, but sometimes it must roar. And as the dawn crept over Fort Bragg, Elena Harper knew, tomorrow she would have to decide which it would be. What do you do when the warning comes true? When the storm you feared finally knocks at your door? The message had been clear, they're coming tomorrow. And tomorrow had arrived. The morning at Fort Bragg began like any other, boots pounding on asphalt, voices shouting cadence, flags snapping in the wind. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Soldiers marched with stiffer backs, eyes sharper, conversations hushed. Elena Harper felt it as soon as she stepped outside her quarters. The air was too still. The world was watching too closely. The black car was gone, replaced by something worse: absence. The kind of absence that told her eyes she wasn't alone, even when she couldn't see the shadows. Her boots carried her toward the training fields, but she didn't expect to reach them. Not today. She was right. Halfway down the path, two men intercepted her. Not MPs, not officers, contractors, civilian but with military posture too precise to be anything but trained. They wore no insignia, just dark suits and colder eyes. "Captain Harper," one said flatly, "come with us." She didn't move. On whose orders? They didn't answer. She scanned them quickly. Weight distribution, dominant hand, the bulge under a jacket that wasn't just a phone. Every detail registered in the quiet places of her mind. If she resisted, it would escalate fast, and escalation was exactly what they wanted. So she nodded once and followed. The vehicle they led her into wasn't marked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and static. No windows, just steel and silence. The drive stretched long, too long, farther than anywhere on base. When the vehicle finally stopped, she stepped into a place she knew well enough to hate, an off-the-books facility. No signs, no insignia, just walls painted in neutral tones and cameras that blinked like predators. They guided her down a corridor into a small room, a table, two chairs, nothing else. And waiting inside, Major General Wilkes. He didn't rise when she entered. He didn't need to. His presence was command itself, heavy and sharp. "Captain Harper," he said, his voice even, "do you know why you're here?" The echo of his earlier question struck her. "Do you know why you're here?" This time she answered differently. "Because I'm not supposed to exist." A flicker crossed his face, not surprise, recognition. He leaned back in his chair. "You're a problem, Harper, a dangerous one, not because of what you did to Colonel Vance. That, frankly, might have been overdue." His voice dropped, cold and measured. "You're dangerous because you reminded people that silence isn't the only option." Her pulse quickened, though her face stayed calm. "That scares you?" she asked softly. Wilkes' eyes narrowed. "It destabilizes everything. Discipline, command, the very structure we rely on. One woman stands up and suddenly others think they can. That's chaos." She tilted her head. "Or change." The word hung in the air, electric. Wilkes rose at last, circling the table slowly. "You think you're the first to see cracks in the system. You think you're the first to believe you can fix it. You're not. The difference is, they knew when to stop. They understood survival matters more than truth." He stopped behind her, voice low. "So I'll offer you what they took. Survival. Sign the statement. Admit misconduct. We bury this. You fade back into the shadows where you belong." Elena's hands lay still on the table, but inside she felt the storm. Her grandmother's voice whispered. Sometimes strength whispers. Her own memory countered. Sometimes silence is complicity. For years she had chosen patience. Today, patience felt like betrayal. She looked up at Wilkes, her voice steady. "And if I refuse?" His silence was answer enough. The door opened. The contractors reappeared. Their posture had changed, firmer, heavier. They weren't here to escort anymore. They were here to remove. Elena rose slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes swept the room, calculating. She could drop one before he reached for his weapon. Maybe both. But then what? What did violence solve in a room designed to hide violence? So she walked. They guided her back to the vehicle, down corridors that swallowed light. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of something she had kept buried: doubt. What if patience hadn't been strength? What if it had only delayed the inevitable? The vehicle stopped again. This time, they didn't take her back to base. They left her at the edge of a deserted field, the sun bleeding into horizon. No explanation, no escort, just silence. As the car disappeared, she stood alone in the open air. The message was clear. They weren't removing her, not yet. They were warning her. Disappear, stay quiet, or next time the field would be empty of everything but her body. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She stared at the empty sky, her breath catching on a question she had avoided for too long. Was silence strength or cowardice? She thought of Rodriguez, his tears breaking decades of armor. She thought of the young lieutenant's voice trembling with courage. She thought of the cadet whose hands had steadied under her guidance. And she thought of Vance's scream, sharp and ugly, when the silence finally broke. She sank to her knees in the grass, hands gripping the earth. For the first time since her revelation, she allowed herself to feel the storm fully. Fear, anger, guilt, hope. She had wanted to expose the rot without becoming the story. But now she was the story. And she couldn't decide if that was victory or failure. Night fell slowly, stars pricking the darkness. She lay back in the grass, staring at them, and remembered another night long ago. Afghanistan, 2009. Lying in the dirt beside men who wouldn't see the sunrise, whispering to the sky that she would keep fighting for them. She had kept that promise, but promises wear thin under silence. When she returned to base the next morning, whispers swirled faster than ever. Some soldiers nodded at her with respect that hadn't existed before. Others turned away, eyes filled with resentment. The lines were sharper now. And somewhere above her, behind closed doors, decisions were being made. She could feel it in the way eyes followed her, in the way the air seemed to tighten when she entered a room, in the way Rodriguez approached her quietly, his voice low. "They're not going to stop, ma'am. You know that, right?" She looked at him, the man she had once carried out of rubble, and saw the fear in his eyes, not for himself but for her. "They can't silence what they didn't build," she said softly. But even as she spoke the words, doubt twisted inside her. Because ghosts weren't supposed to live in daylight. And daylight was burning her now. How does a system kill what it can't control? Not always with bullets, sometimes with whispers, sometimes with paper, sometimes with a story carefully written to erase another. Elena Harper felt it the moment she stepped into the command building 2 days later. The air shifted. Conversations cut short as she passed. Folders closed. Eyes narrowed. And then she saw it. Her name across the bulletin board. A memorandum, official and sterile. Words carved with surgical precision. Captain Harper under investigation for misconduct. Concerns regarding stability, judgment, and psychological fitness. The system had spoken. The whispers followed quickly. "She's unstable. They say she snapped in combat years ago. Heard she forged her records. Medals weren't even hers." It didn't matter that none of it was true. In the military, reputation moved faster than fact, and once doubt was seated, truth had to fight uphill. Rodriguez found her outside, his jaw tight, eyes burning. "Ma'am, this is character assassination. They're trying to bury you before this spreads further." "I know," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but inside something cracked. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It was about the message. If they could make her a liar, a fraud, then every woman watching would learn the same lesson. Don't rise, don't resist, don't speak. That night she sat at her desk, staring at the reprimand, the memorandum, the lies multiplying like vines. She thought of her grandmother's words again, true strength whispers. But now the whisper felt drowned out by the roar of lies. And then her phone buzzed. Another message, no sender, no signature. Watch your six, they won't stop at paper. Her eyes lifted to the window. The base was quiet under the hum of generators and distant engines, but she felt it, eyes in the dark, waiting. The next escalation came fast. A training exercise, night maneuvers in the woods. She wasn't scheduled, but orders came through anyway. Captain Harper assigned to lead a mock patrol. A test, they called it. Rodriguez intercepted her before she boarded the truck, his voice low, urgent. This isn't a test, it's a setup. Her eyes scanned his face. He wasn't guessing, he knew. Still, she climbed aboard, because refusing would give them what they wanted, fear. The convoy rolled into the darkness, headlights carving through pines. Soldiers around her shifted uneasily, some loyal to her, some not, some simply caught in a storm they didn't understand. The exercise began like any other, patrol through dense forest, radios crackling with coded chatter. But within minutes something felt wrong, too quiet, too staged. And then it happened. Gunfire, not blanks, real. Muzzle flashes tore the night. Soldiers dove for cover, shouts rising in chaos. Elena's instincts ignited. She pressed against the earth, scanning arcs of fire, calculating angles. These weren't cadets firing too eagerly. This was precision, an ambush dressed as training. She moved without hesitation, pulling a young private down before a round torbark where his head had been. Stay low, wait for my signal. Her voice was calm, her body alive, years of muscle memory returning like a tide. But inside, fury burned. They weren't just trying to erase her. They were willing to kill their own to do it. She crawled through mud and pine needles, flanking the origin of the fire. Two silhouettes, not in standard gear, not part of her team, contractors, guns real, eyes cold. She waited for the rhythm of their shots. 1, 2, 3, the pause. And in the pause she moved. Silent, swift, her body a shadow among shadows. She struck fast, wrist twisted, rifle redirected, a body dropped without sound. The second turned, but too late. She drove him into the earth, his weapon skittering into darkness. The forest went still. Her soldiers stared at her in disbelief as she emerged, dragging one unconscious man by his collar. The other groaned, pinned by her boot. These aren't blanks, she said, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. She dropped a live round into the dirt where everyone could see it. This wasn't training, this was execution. Gasps, whispers. The young private she had saved looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. And in that moment truth spread again, faster than fear. They returned to base at dawn, two contractors restrained, proof in hand. But she knew what awaited her. Wilkes. He was waiting in the command center, his face carved from stone. "You're making this worse," he said flatly as she entered. "You sent them to kill me." He didn't flinch. "I sent no one." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Then who did?" His silence was answer enough. The system didn't need his signature. The system acted on its own, protecting itself, preserving itself. "You think exposing this makes you a hero," he said, voice sharp now. "You think anyone outside these walls will understand. They'll call it paranoia. They'll call it betrayal. And when they do, you'll be alone." Her chest rose and fell, but her eyes never left his. "Better alone with truth," she said, "than surrounded by lies." The words didn't shout, they whispered, but the whisper cut deeper than rage. Wilkes exhaled, a shadow crossing his face. "Then you'd better be ready, Captain, because the system will come for you again, and next time it won't miss." She left the room, her pulse steady but her hands trembling once she reached the empty corridor. Because he was right, they wouldn't stop. And now every soldier on that patrol knew it. Every whisper carried proof. Every glance told her the tide was shifting. But tides don't just shift, they crash. That night Rodriguez found her again. His voice was fierce, his eyes wet. "You saved me once. You saved them tonight. Let me stand with you now." For a moment, Elena felt something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Not fear, not anger. Hope. But hope was fragile, dangerous, a target. And as she looked at Rodriguez, at the soldier she had carried out of rubble years ago, she wondered, would standing together save them both? Or would it doom them faster? Because ghosts didn't survive in daylight. And daylight was coming fast. What happens when whispers turn into voices? When soldiers who looked away finally meet your eyes? Fort Bragg was no longer quiet. Not really. Orders still barked, rifles still fired on the range, convoys still rumbled across the asphalt. But beneath it all, something had cracked. The video of the colonel's broken arm had started the fracture. The ambush in the forest deepened it. Now, every soldier on base lived inside the tension of a question. Which side would they stand on when the system demanded silence again? Elena Harper walked the hallways, knowing the answer wasn't clear. Some glanced at her with admiration, shoulders squaring as if her presence gave them permission to stand taller. Others looked away, their loyalty chained to the system that had always fed them. And in between were the uncertain, the many who simply wanted to survive, hoping the storm would pass without demanding a choice. But storms never pass quietly. By midday, rumors swelled into something undeniable. The contractors captured in the ambush had vanished. No record, no interrogation, no paperwork, just gone. "Erased," Rodriguez spat, his voice low but burning. He met Elena in a corner of the motor pool where the smell of oil and steel drowned out nearby voices. "You brought them back alive. Proof. And now, nothing. It's like it never happened." Elena's eyes narrowed. She wasn't surprised, only weary. That's how the system survives. Erase the pieces that don't fit. Rewrite the story before anyone can read it. Rodriguez shook his head. Not this time. Too many saw, too many know. She studied him, searching his face for certainty. He gave her none, only fire. "Knowing and speaking aren't the same," she said softly. He opened his mouth to argue but stopped when footsteps echoed near. A pair of officers passed, their conversation clipped. "Command, calling an emergency assembly. Containment measures, narrative control." Rodriguez's eyes met hers. He didn't have to say it, they both knew. This was it. That evening the entire base assembled in the main hall. Rows upon rows of uniforms, boots lined in perfect squares. The air was thick, too hot, too still. At the front a podium waited, and behind it Major General Wilkes. He spoke like a man delivering a sermon, his voice steady, resonant, designed to soothe and dominate at once. "Discipline," he began, "is the backbone of this institution. Without it, we are nothing. Recent events have threatened that discipline. Lies, rumors, misunderstandings spread by those who do not understand the consequences of their actions." The words flowed like poison disguised as medicine. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking toward Elena, who stood silently among them. Wilkes' gaze swept the crowd before landing, inevitably on her. "Captain Harper," he said, voice loud now sharp, "step forward." Every head turned. She walked, each step measured, until she stood before him. The distance between them crackled with history unspoken. "Do you deny," Wilkes said, "that your actions have disrupted order, that you endangered this base with reckless behavior, that you have undermined morale by spreading falsehoods?" The silence was suffocating, 200 soldiers holding their breath. Elena's eyes lifted, steady, calm. "No." Gasps rippled. "I don't deny it," she continued, "because it's not reckless to defend yourself. It's not endangerment to protect your people. and it's not falsehood to speak the truth you've all seen with your own eyes." Her voice was quiet, but every ear strained to catch it. "You saw what Vance did. You saw what happened in the woods. You know what silence costs. The question is, will you keep paying it?" The hall stirred, restless, uneasy. Some eyes lit with recognition, others darkened with anger. Wilkes slammed his palm against the podium, his composure cracking. "Enough! You are one captain, one woman. You do not speak for this institution." Elena's gaze swept the hall. "I don't have to. They'll decide for themselves." And in that moment, something shifted. Rodriguez stepped forward from the ranks, his voice carrying. "She saved me, twice. Once in combat, once here. That's not recklessness, that's leadership." Another voice joined. The young lieutenant, the one who had once dared to question. Her chin lifted, jaw firm. "She speaks the truth. And if truth undermines discipline, maybe discipline needs questioning." The hall erupted, not in chaos, but in something more dangerous: choice. Soldiers speaking, voices rising, lines forming. Some shouted in support, others cursed betrayal. The clean order of rows fractured into a tide. Wilkes barked commands, his voice thunderous, but fewer obeyed with each word. His authority was cracking in real time. Elena stood still, the storm swirling around her, and felt a truth land heavy in her chest. This was what she had feared, not silence, not invisibility, but daylight, because daylight forced everyone to choose. Rodriguez moved to her side, his voice low, urgent. "You've lit the fire, but fire burns uncontrolled. How far are you willing to take this?" Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "As far as it takes." Wilkes' face twisted, fury breaking through his calm mask. "You think you can break this institution? You think one woman can unravel what generations built?" Her eyes met his. "Not one woman, all the ones you ignored." The hall roared again, voices colliding. Soldiers no longer statues but people, choosing, doubting, questioning. Wilkes raised his hand, signaling MPs at the edges of the hall. They moved fast, weapons in hand. And in that split second, Elena knew this wasn't about silencing her anymore. This was about crushing what she had ignited. Her chest rose once, deep, steady. She remembered Fallujah, Mosul, every battlefield where choices carved the line between life and death. And she whispered to herself, just loud enough to hear, "Strength doesn't shout, but it stands." As MPs closed in, Rodriguez's voice thundered, echoing hers, "Stand with her." And soldiers moved. Some stepped forward, some back. The line of the base of the institution itself was splitting before their eyes. The hall trembled, with the weight of history breaking. And Elena Harper, once invisible, stood in the center of it all, visible now, undeniable, no longer a ghost. But visibility is a dangerous thing. Because the brighter the light, the sharper the shadow. And she knew the system would not stop here. The real fight was still coming. How does it end when silence finally breaks? Not cleanly, not neatly. Truth never lands soft, it crashes, splinters, scars. The hall was still chaos, soldiers shouting, MPs pushing through the crowd, Wilkes barking commands that fewer and fewer obeyed. Elena Harper stood in the center, calm as stone, her chest rising with steady breaths. Rodriguez was at her side, the young lieutenant just behind. Lines had already been drawn, loyalty to the institution or loyalty to the truth. And the weight of choice pressed on every soldier present. The MPs reached her first. Their weapons weren't raised, but their intent was clear. Contain, remove, silence. Elena didn't flinch, she didn't move. Her stillness was louder than any shout. "Captain Harper," one of them said, his voice clipped, rehearsed. "You're under arrest for insubordination, endangerment, and conduct unbecoming." The words were heavy with authority, but they wavered under the weight of the room. Because everyone watching knew, they had seen her, they had seen him, they had seen enough. Rodriguez stepped between her and the MPs, his massive frame unyielding. "You'll take her over my body." The MP hesitated, then another soldier stepped forward, then another. Within seconds, a line had formed, not of officers, not of command, but of men and women who had chosen. Wilkes' voice cracked with fury. "Stand down, that's an order." But orders only carry weight when belief holds, and belief was fracturing. The MPs froze, caught between obedience and conscience. And in that suspended moment, Elena spoke. "Look at yourselves," she said softly, her voice threading through the noise. "Look at what this uniform means. Not power, not intimidation, it means responsibility to protect, to serve, to stand when it costs something." Her eyes swept the room, landing on faces that had avoided her before, faces that had doubted, faces that now searched themselves for courage. The system tells you silence is strength, that looking away is survival, but you know better, you've always known. The question is, what do you do now? The room shifted. Some soldiers lowered their heads, others raised their chins. Wilkes saw it, felt it, and his calm mask shattered. His voice thundered, desperate now. "You think this ends with you. You think they won't bury this. You'll burn your careers, your futures, for one woman's defiance." Elena turned toward him, her voice calm, unshaken. "It's not for me. It's for the ones you erased, the ones who couldn't speak, the ones who carried truth alone until it crushed them." And for the first time, Wilkes faltered. Because he knew, they all knew. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about them. The MPs stepped back. One by one, soldiers chose. Some returned to formation, loyal to command. Others crossed the invisible line, standing beside Elena. The hall had become a battlefield of conviction. Wilkes' face hardened, his jaw tight. "So be it. You've made your choice, Captain, but understand this. The system does not fall to one rebellion, it buries them. It buries you." Elena's eyes held his, steady as steel. "Then let it try." The assembly broke into chaos, officers shouting, soldiers arguing, MPs caught in paralysis. But in the storm, something irreversible had happened. The silence was gone. Elena left the hall surrounded not by guards, but by soldiers who had chosen to walk with her. Rodriguez close, the young lieutenant at her shoulder, a dozen others who had decided that truth, however fragile, mattered more than comfort. Outside, the night air was thick, heavy with humidity and history. The flags snapped above them, their fabric loud in the wind. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Rodriguez broke the silence, his voice low. "What now?" Elena looked at him, then at the others. Faces marked by doubt, fear, resolve. They weren't many, but they were enough. "Now," she said, "we keep standing." Because standing wasn't about winning. It wasn't about tearing down the whole system in one blow. It was about refusing to bend, even when bending was easier. She knew the fight wasn't over, that Wilkes and others like him would regroup, retaliate, tighten their grip. She knew threats would come sharper now, more dangerous. But she also knew something else. The lie of silence was broken. And once broken, it never fully returns. That night, alone in her quarters, she laid the medals out once more. Silver star, bronze star with valor, 2 purple hearts, symbols she had once buried to fade into invisibility. Her hand lingered on the black coin, Task Force 7, the ghost life she had lived. For years, she believed disappearing was the only way to fight, that whispering was safer than roaring. But as she looked at the coin in the dim light, she understood. Strength wasn't about disappearing. Strength wasn't about shouting either. Strength was about standing. Even when it broke you, even when it cost you everything. She closed her eyes and her grandmother's voice echoed one last time. "True strength whispers, child. It never needs to shout." And in her heart, Elena added the rest. But sometimes it simply acts. When dawn broke, Fort Bragg looked the same. Soldiers marched. Convoys rumbled. Commands rang out across the asphalt. But something had changed. A fracture had been carved into the silence, and in that fracture, something new was growing. Not rebellion, not chaos. Possibility. And as Elena Harper walked across the parade ground, eyes followed her, not dismissive anymore, not mocking, searching, weighing, waiting. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, she just walked. Because she knew the truth. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.